When we think of Abraham Lincoln, we often envision the towering figure who led the nation through its most divisive time, a man of unparalleled integrity, perseverance, and wisdom. We remember his speeches, his unshakable resolve, and his vision for a united America. But what if I told you that this towering figure wasn't born great? That his path to leadership wasn't paved with immediate success, but instead with struggles, failures, and profound inner battles that many of us can relate to. The truth is, Lincoln's greatness didn't come from his triumphs. It was forged in the crucible of hidden struggles that tested his very spirit. Before Lincoln ever became the president who freed the slaves, he faced battles most of us would never wish to endure: personal loss, crushing failure, and the constant weight of self-doubt. Yet through it all, he found the resilience to rise, again and again. It's this inner journey, these hidden battles, that we will explore today. What if I told you that the same principles that guided Lincoln through his personal trials could help you navigate your own challenges? The road to greatness isn't always about winning every battle. It's about how we rise after the fall, how we endure, learn, and ultimately transform. So let's dive into the hidden battles that shaped Abraham Lincoln into the leader we revere today. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Legend. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the life of one of America's most iconic leaders, Abraham Lincoln. You probably know him as the president who ended slavery and preserved the Union during the Civil War. But have you ever wondered about the personal battles he fought before all of that? Before Lincoln's name became synonymous with freedom and justice, he faced years of failure, loss, and struggle. These early challenges weren't just political, they were deeply personal, internal battles that would define the man he would become. They shaped his resilience, his profound empathy, and his unshakable belief in the possibilities of human progress. In this video, we'll walk through Lincoln's journey from a humble frontier upbringing to his rise in law and politics. We'll look at how the tragedies in his personal life, including his battles with melancholy and his intense grief over the loss of loved ones, shaped his character. We'll explore how his repeated political defeats, far from breaking him, served as stepping stones that honed his determination and skill. By the end of this video, you'll see that Lincoln's greatness wasn't something that appeared overnight. It was the result of years of grappling with adversity and rising above it. And in his story, there are lessons we can all apply to our own lives, especially when we find ourselves facing what seem like insurmountable obstacles. Are you ready to uncover the hidden battles that shaped one of history's greatest leaders? Let's begin. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a humble log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. His early life was shaped by poverty and hardship, circumstances that, by today's standards, would seem almost impossible to overcome. His family lived on the frontier, moving from place to place with little stability. Lincoln's father, Thomas, was a farmer with little skill in land management. This led to constant struggles to maintain a roof over their heads and food on the table. For young Lincoln, this meant an environment filled with hardship, instability, and uncertainty. His family's financial struggles were constant, and his father's inability to provide a stable home made young Abe's early years especially difficult. While Lincoln's mother, Nancy, was a nurturing figure, she too faced the stress of living in poverty, and tragically, she passed away when Lincoln was just 9 years old. The loss of his mother was a pivotal moment in Lincoln's early life, a psychological wound that would impact him deeply, though he would rarely speak of it. Psychologically, the loss of a primary caregiver during such a formative stage of life can create a sense of abandonment or a feeling of being thrust into the world with no solid foundation. For Lincoln, this would only strengthen his self-reliance, which would become one of his defining traits. With little access to formal education, Lincoln's opportunities to learn were scarce. He attended school only for brief periods, sometimes no more than a few months at a time. The rough frontier conditions and his father's frequent moves made it nearly impossible for him to receive a formal education. Yet, despite these circumstances, Lincoln developed an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Lincoln would later describe his formal education as being absolutely nothing. He relied heavily on whatever books he could find, often reading by the dim light of a fire. He self-educated himself in law, history, literature, and even mathematics, fields he had little access to but a deep passion for. This deep hunger for knowledge became the foundation of his intellectual prowess, despite the overwhelming odds against him. The psychological impact of Lincoln's early hardships cannot be overstated. The combination of loss, poverty, and limited opportunities would have shaped his worldview significantly. It's likely that Lincoln developed a profound empathy for the suffering of others, especially the poor and the oppressed. This empathy would later influence his approach to leadership and politics, particularly his moral stance on slavery. Yet, even as he faced these challenges, Lincoln was building the resilience he would need to become one of America's greatest presidents. His early life wasn't easy, far from it, but every difficulty he encountered became a lesson, and every setback was an opportunity to build inner strength. This type of early adversity, though incredibly painful, planted the seeds of a character that would go on to guide him through some of the most difficult moments in American history. These formative years on the frontier taught Lincoln to be self-reliant and to forge his own path when the system failed him. These traits would define much of his later life, especially in moments when he would face rejection, failure, and immense pressure. His frontier upbringing wasn't just about survival. It was about learning how to endure, adapt, and grow stronger with each passing challenge. By the time Lincoln was in his early 20s, he had developed a resilience that would serve him in politics, in law, and in life. But the journey from this humble frontier boy to a renowned statesman was still far from certain. Little did he know that the early hardships he endured would serve as the bedrock for the challenges he would face as he pursued his destiny in law, politics, and leadership. In 1830, Lincoln's family moved again, this time to Illinois. At the age of 21, Abraham struck out on his own, taking a job as a rail splitter, working on the land that he had grown so accustomed to in his youth. But this wasn't where Lincoln would stay. His thirst for knowledge was insatiable, and he knew that his future lay not in physical labor, but in intellectual pursuits. With little money, no formal education, and a dauntingly low social standing, Lincoln began his quest to learn law. He studied law books by himself, and through sheer determination, passed the bar exam at the age of 25. This was a tremendous achievement, one that would have been considered nearly impossible for a young man of his background. But for Lincoln, the journey to self-education wasn't just about the law. It was about proving to himself and others that he could overcome his circumstances and build something lasting. However, Lincoln's entry into the world of law was far from smooth. His first attempts at building a practice were challenging. He faced financial struggles, and initially, his law career was far from glamorous. He was often relegated to small cases and the less prestigious aspects of legal work, but this only further honed his resilience. The setbacks Lincoln faced weren't simply about failure. They were formative experiences that shaped his inner drive to succeed. By the early 1830s, Lincoln also entered the political arena, running for the Illinois state legislature in 1832. He lost. Undeterred, he ran again in 1834 and lost once more. His political failures were a direct result of his lack of experience, the fierce competition in Illinois politics, and no doubt his humble origins. Yet, with each defeat, Lincoln's resolve only grew stronger. These early political losses were more than mere setbacks. They were character-building experiences that taught Lincoln to withstand public rejection and focus on his ultimate goals. Lincoln's ability to learn from failure would become one of his most significant qualities. Instead of becoming discouraged or bitter, he analyzed each setback as an opportunity for growth. In his writings and speeches, Lincoln often reflected on the nature of failure, noting that while failure is difficult, it is not the end. The essence of leadership, he realized, lay not in achieving perfection, but in rising each time you fall. His unwavering belief that his past failures did not define him, but rather shaped him, would be key as he continued his journey. By 1836, Lincoln had finally found his footing in the legal world. He moved to Springfield, Illinois, where his practice grew. He became well known for his ability to argue cases with logic and clarity, and over the next several years, his reputation as a lawyer and a speaker solidified. But while his legal career was progressing, his political ambitions remained ever present. He believed that to make a real difference in the world, he needed to work from a position of political power. But the road ahead would not be easy, and his failures along the way would teach him invaluable lessons about leadership. His continued persistence in the face of rejection reflected a deeply psychological truth. Success is not always a straight path. It often requires the ability to view each setback as a stepping stone, an opportunity to grow stronger and smarter. Lincoln's journey wasn't just about legal victories or political triumphs. It was about developing a mindset of resilience, self-belief, and strategic thinking. Lincoln's journey through law and politics wasn't just about overcoming external obstacles. It was about conquering the internal battles of self-doubt and fear. Each rejection, each failure, served to prepare him for the far greater challenges that awaited him later in life. His experiences during these years were not just about learning the law, but about learning himself. In many ways, his failures and difficulties in his early career allowed him to develop the qualities that would make him one of the greatest leaders in American history. His persistence through rejection gave him the resilience to face even greater political and moral dilemmas down the line, particularly those that would define his presidency. As if political failure and financial hardship weren't enough to test Lincoln's resilience, his personal life was fraught with grief and sorrow that would weigh heavily on him throughout his life. Lincoln's marriage to Mary Todd in 1842, though filled with love and affection at first, would soon become a source of deep emotional turmoil. Mary Todd Lincoln, a woman of strong personality and intellect, struggled with her own mental health issues, which were compounded by the personal stresses of living in the public eye. The couple had 4 children, but tragically, 2 of them would die in their youth. In 1850, their first son, Edward, died at the age of 4, and in 1862, their beloved Willie, aged 11, passed away from typhoid fever. These losses were devastating, especially for Lincoln, who, despite his public persona of strength and resolve, was privately overwhelmed by sorrow. The death of his children was not something he could easily overcome, and the weight of this grief would take its toll on his mental state. While many leaders might have buckled under such sorrow, Lincoln seemed to use his personal suffering as a source of greater empathy. It was as though the grief he experienced, though intensely painful, deepened his understanding of the suffering of others, which later fueled his capacity for compassionate leadership. Psychologically, chronic grief can lead to deep feelings of depression and despair. For Lincoln, these personal losses weren't merely events to mourn, they became a part of his identity. The psychological burden of living through the death of his children likely contributed to his melancholic tendencies. At various points in his life, Lincoln struggled with what we would now likely recognize as clinical depression. He once remarked to a friend, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth." Despite the deep emotional toll these personal tragedies took on Lincoln, he did not allow his suffering to completely define him. Instead, he channeled it into a deeper understanding of human frailty and resilience. His melancholy, far from making him a passive victim, seemed to sharpen his awareness of the suffering of others, giving him a level of empathy and understanding that many others, including his political opponents, lacked. Throughout his life, Lincoln's emotional volatility, his ability to swing between deep despair and renewed hope, was both a source of personal suffering and an asset. His grief gave him the strength to endure his own internal battles, which later made him unflinchingly empathetic toward the suffering of a nation on the brink of collapse. His melancholy also led him to develop a sense of humor that was both self-deprecating and compassionate. He would often tell stories and jokes to ease the tension around him, using humor as a coping mechanism to deal with the dark thoughts that seemed to plague him. This ability to laugh in the face of tragedy is part of what made Lincoln so relatable and beloved by many. It humanized him, showing the world that even the greatest leaders are not immune to pain. In a sense, Lincoln's personal grief and melancholy prepared him for the immense challenges he would face later in life. When the Civil War began and the nation was torn apart by violence and division, Lincoln's experiences with loss gave him the perspective needed to lead with compassion and wisdom. His ability to remain steady, even in the darkest moments, was not due to a lack of suffering. It was precisely because of it. Lincoln's sorrow didn't break him. It reshaped him. It gave him the capacity to connect with people on a deeply human level, and it was this empathy that would guide him through the hardest decisions of his presidency. In psychological terms, Lincoln's ability to process and endure his grief speaks to an important concept known as post-traumatic growth. This idea suggests that after a period of intense suffering, people can emerge stronger, more compassionate, and more capable of navigating future challenges. For Lincoln, the grief he experienced in his personal life didn't just break him down, it ultimately contributed to his growth as a leader. This emotional growth allowed Lincoln to endure the many trials of his presidency. His personal losses helped him stay grounded in the humanity of those around him. It was his deep empathy, developed through personal suffering, that would shape his leadership during the darkest days of the Civil War. By the 1850s, Lincoln's career had taken a new turn, one that would ultimately bring him to the national stage. He had become deeply involved in the issue of slavery, which was quickly dividing the country. Though Lincoln had long held an anti-slavery stance, it was during the 1850s that his opposition to slavery became more vocal and resolute. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which allowed for the potential expansion of slavery into territories where it had previously been prohibited, sparked a national debate. For Lincoln, this was a moral and political crisis. As someone who had lived through the struggles of poverty, he deeply understood the moral implications of human suffering. Slavery, in his mind, was not just a political issue, it was a moral evil that undermined the very foundation of the nation. Lincoln had initially retreated from politics after his early defeats. For several years, he had remained relatively quiet, focusing on his law practice and personal life. But the issue of slavery forced him back into the public eye. He began giving speeches against the expansion of slavery, using his growing platform to argue that slavery was not only a moral wrong, but also a political threat to the future of the nation. In 1858, he famously debated Stephen A. Douglas in the Illinois Senate race. Though he did not win the election, the debates catapulted Lincoln into national prominence. For many, Lincoln's return to politics after years of failure seemed improbable. Yet, it was this very period of obscurity that allowed Lincoln to refine his views, hone his speaking skills, and develop the political savvy that would later prove crucial during his presidency. In the face of rising tension between the North and South, Lincoln's voice became a beacon for those seeking a more just and unified America. Psychologically, Lincoln's return to politics after years of personal defeat speaks to an important principle of resilience, the ability to stay true to one's values, even when the path forward seems uncertain. Lincoln did not shy away from the moral challenges of his time, even when it meant entering the political arena again after past failures. His decision to confront the slavery issue head-on demonstrated the deep moral clarity that had developed over the years, despite his personal suffering. His unwavering commitment to the anti-slavery cause was not only a political move, it was a deeply personal one. Having experienced loss and suffering firsthand, Lincoln understood that slavery was not merely an abstract political issue, it was about the suffering of human beings. His speeches on slavery were filled with moral conviction, and his view of the Constitution was that it should protect the rights of all people, not just a select few. The psychological toll of taking on such a polarizing issue cannot be underestimated. Slavery was, and remains, one of the most contentious issues in American history. For Lincoln, engaging in this battle meant risking not just his political future, but his personal safety and reputation. He was entering a battle that would test his moral resolve and his ability to navigate a divided and hostile nation. But despite the personal cost, Lincoln remained steadfast. One of the most defining features of Lincoln's character during this period was his ability to remain composed and focused in the face of fierce opposition. His commitment to a higher moral purpose and his conviction that the nation could not thrive while tolerating slavery pushed him to continue speaking out despite the personal and political risks. This time in Lincoln's life demonstrates the profound psychological importance of moral clarity. Lincoln's unwavering belief in the fundamental equality of all people allowed him to endure the immense political pressure he faced. His journey to this moment wasn't just about achieving a political goal, it was about aligning his actions with his deeply held principles, no matter the consequences. This ability to stay aligned with his core values, even when the road ahead seemed treacherous, would be key to his success as a leader. In these years, Lincoln's political battles began to reflect a larger national crisis. The question of slavery wasn't just about politics, it was about the soul of the nation. And Lincoln, in his own way, was preparing for the much larger test that lay ahead. Lincoln had spent much of his life confronting personal and political failure, but now he was preparing for the ultimate test. His stance on slavery, which had evolved from a quiet moral objection to an urgent political platform, would soon take center stage in ways he could never have imagined. The decade leading up to his presidency was marked by an intense internal struggle. Should he continue his legal practice, stay out of politics, and remain relatively safe from the nation's growing turmoil? Or should he step into the fray once more, risking everything for a cause that might not even succeed? In the end, Lincoln chose to embrace the struggle. He chose to fight for the Union, for justice, and for a nation divided by slavery. This decision was a product of both his moral convictions and the mental fortitude he had developed over the years. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States, an outcome that would forever alter the course of history. His election came at a time of deep national division, politically, socially, and morally. The nation was on the brink of civil war, with the issue of slavery tearing apart the Union. Lincoln's presidency, which began on March 4, 1861, marked the start of his ultimate test as a leader. The political landscape at the time was hostile. Southern states, fearing the loss of their power and way of life with Lincoln's anti-slavery stance, began seceding from the Union almost immediately after his election. By the time he took office, 7 states had already declared their secession, forming the Confederate States of America. Lincoln was tasked with holding the Union together, an almost insurmountable challenge that would test his leadership, resolve, and very sense of self. On the surface, Lincoln appeared confident, even as he faced the disintegration of the nation he loved. But internally, the pressure was immense. He had already endured years of personal loss, failure, and suffering, and now, as president, he was faced with the most profound crisis the nation had ever known. The stakes could not have been higher. If he failed, the United States would be shattered forever. Psychologically, the demands on Lincoln were extraordinary. The weight of the presidency during the Civil War was not only political, but deeply emotional and personal. Lincoln had to make decisions that would lead to thousands of deaths on both sides of the conflict. He had to maintain national unity despite constant opposition, both from the South and from factions within the North. Every day was filled with the pressure of leading a nation on the brink of collapse, all while coping with the personal grief he still carried from the loss of his children and his ongoing struggles with melancholy. Despite these overwhelming challenges, Lincoln's leadership was characterized by a remarkable sense of calm and clarity. One of his most notable qualities during this time was his ability to make tough decisions with a deep sense of empathy, understanding the human cost of each action. His empathy, honed through years of personal sorrow, allowed him to see the war not just as a political conflict, but as a deeply human one, affecting families and communities across the nation. One of the defining moments of Lincoln's presidency came in 1863 with the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. While the decision to free the slaves was a bold and historic one, it was not an easy one. Lincoln knew that it would further alienate the Southern states, likely prolong the war, and create intense political backlash. But he also understood that the moral weight of slavery had to be addressed. In his mind, the preservation of the Union and the eradication of slavery were intertwined. The Emancipation Proclamation, which he issued as a war measure, would eventually lead to the abolition of slavery in the United States. At the time, many questioned Lincoln's decision to make the end of slavery a central goal of the war. Some of his political allies feared that it would alienate Northern Democrats and push the South further into rebellion. But Lincoln, deeply aware of the moral imperatives at stake, took the risk. His decision was grounded not just in political strategy, but in his moral belief that slavery was a stain on the soul of the nation. Psychologically, this was a pivotal moment for Lincoln. The weight of making such a monumental decision, one that would alter the course of the nation and shape the future of millions, was immense. Yet, it was precisely his ability to balance his personal empathy with his political acumen that allowed him to see through the fog of war and make a decision that would ultimately define his legacy. The Civil War continued for several more years, and Lincoln's leadership was tested in ways no one could have predicted. He faced criticism from all sides, lost friends and allies, and had to make decisions that would lead to even greater loss of life. Yet, through it all, he remained committed to his vision of a united nation and the abolition of slavery. His moral clarity and emotional intelligence became the cornerstone of his leadership, guiding him through the darkest moments of the war. The pressure Lincoln endured was unimaginable. As president, he was not just a leader, he was the embodiment of the nation's hopes, struggles, and ideals. His ability to navigate the psychological weight of his role while holding firm to his values made him an extraordinary leader. He understood that leadership is not about avoiding difficult decisions or maintaining popularity. It's about making the tough choices that align with one's core values, even when those choices come at a great personal cost. The emotional toll of leading a divided nation, making decisions that led to the deaths of thousands, and dealing with constant threats to his own life took a toll on Lincoln's mental and physical health. But his leadership during these trying times, marked by profound empathy, clarity of purpose, and unshakable resolve, cemented his legacy as one of the greatest presidents in American history. Abraham Lincoln's story is much more than a tale of political triumph. It is a profound illustration of resilience in the face of adversity, empathy in times of national crisis, and the deep power of living with purpose. These qualities didn't emerge from Lincoln's victories or his moments of glory. They were forged in the fires of personal pain, failure, and intense internal struggle. And these same qualities can inspire and guide us in our own lives. Lincoln's ability to withstand failure, particularly in his early career, shows us a powerful truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's often a stepping stone toward it. The relentless series of defeats in his youth, whether in business or in politics, could have destroyed his spirit, but instead, they helped shape a man who would go on to lead a nation through its most divisive war. He learned to embrace setbacks, not as permanent marks of defeat, but as challenges to overcome, each one building the inner strength needed for the next. Psychologically, this is the essence of resilience, the capacity to rebound from failure, to learn from it, and to keep moving forward. Lincoln's early years, filled with rejection and hardship, were crucial in teaching him how to face failure without losing his vision or purpose. His story reminds us that resilience doesn't mean avoiding hardship. It means learning how to adapt and rise stronger after each fall. Equally important in Lincoln's leadership was his deep empathy. As he navigated the complexities of the Civil War, his ability to understand the suffering of others, whether the soldiers on the battlefield or the enslaved people he sought to free, was a driving force behind his decisions. His personal losses, particularly the death of his children, allowed him to connect with the grief of a nation in ways that many leaders could not. Lincoln's empathy wasn't just a feeling, it was a foundation for his actions. He made decisions not just based on strategy, but with a profound awareness of the human cost involved. Empathy in leadership is often misunderstood as a weakness, yet Lincoln demonstrated that it can be one of a leader's greatest strengths. His ability to listen to his advisors, to understand the fears of the Union soldiers, and to recognize the moral imperatives of slavery guided him through the most difficult decisions of his presidency. He showed that leadership, at its best, is not about dominance or control. It's about serving the greater good with compassion and understanding. Lincoln's journey also teaches us the importance of living with purpose. From his earliest days, when he set out to educate himself despite all odds, to his eventual resolve in fighting to preserve the Union, Lincoln's life was driven by a clear, unshakable sense of mission. He didn't become president to gain fame or power. He became president because he believed deeply in the ideals of liberty and equality, and he knew that these ideals were worth fighting for. Purpose in life is more than just a lofty concept. It is the very thing that can keep us moving forward during our darkest moments. Lincoln's unwavering commitment to his higher mission allowed him to endure the suffering of war, the death of his children, and the constant personal attacks he faced throughout his presidency. His purpose wasn't just political, it was moral, and it gave him the strength to continue, even when the nation seemed on the brink of collapse. Psychologically, a strong sense of purpose is one of the most important predictors of long-term well-being. It helps us navigate life's challenges and provides a framework for decision-making in times of uncertainty. Lincoln's life demonstrates that having a purpose greater than oneself can be a powerful force for resilience. It was this sense of purpose that kept Lincoln steady through the worst of the Civil War, and it is the same sense of purpose that can help us navigate our own challenges today. In every battle, whether personal or political, Lincoln demonstrated the kind of fortitude, empathy, and clarity of purpose that allowed him to navigate the complexities of leadership. His ability to rise after every setback, his emotional intelligence in the face of grief and war, and his unwavering belief in the values of liberty and equality were the traits that defined his presidency. His leadership was not marked by a perfect path or flawless victories, but by his willingness to stay true to his ideals and his vision for a united nation. Through his struggles, Lincoln became the person we remember today, a man who saw the value in every human life and the necessity of preserving a nation that could embody freedom for all. And while we can never fully grasp the depth of his personal pain, we can take inspiration from his ability to use that pain as a source of strength. The lessons Lincoln left us are timeless: resilience in the face of failure, empathy for the suffering of others, and an unwavering commitment to a higher purpose. Abraham Lincoln's life teaches us that failure isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. Lincoln didn't avoid failure. He allowed it to shape him, refine him, and ultimately prepare him for greater challenges. Each setback in his life was met with the understanding that success wasn't defined by never falling. It was defined by how we rise after each fall. For you, this means that failure is not the end. When things don't go your way, whether it's a job you didn't get, a project that fell through, or an idea that didn't come to fruition, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned from the experience. Failure doesn't have to be a source of shame. It can be a catalyst for growth. Lincoln didn't allow his early defeats to define his future. He used them as stepping stones toward the presidency. So when you fail, instead of focusing on the setback, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from it? Lincoln's ability to lead during the Civil War, despite his profound personal grief, shows us the power of managing personal challenges without letting them derail our larger ambitions. He faced unimaginable sorrow, but he didn't allow his personal pain to consume him. He found ways to process his grief while still fulfilling his duties as president. This is a powerful reminder that we don't need to be free from personal difficulties to achieve greatness. If you're facing personal challenges, whether they're family issues, health struggles, or internal battles, remember that they don't have to stop you from pursuing your goals. Lincoln didn't stop his work as a leader because of his sorrow. Instead, he found a way to carry both his grief and his responsibility simultaneously. Perhaps one of Lincoln's most enduring qualities as a leader was his empathy. He truly understood the pain of others, not just intellectually, but on a deep emotional level. This allowed him to make decisions that were not just politically expedient, but morally sound. He listened to his advisors, his soldiers, and the people he served with compassion and a desire to understand their needs. Empathy in leadership is often misunderstood as a weakness. Yet, Lincoln demonstrated that it can be one of a leader's greatest strengths. His ability to listen to others' perspectives, acknowledge their pain, and make decisions that reflected a deeper understanding of their experiences helped guide the nation through its darkest moments. Leading with empathy means seeing things from others' perspectives, acknowledging their pain, and making decisions that reflect a deeper understanding of their experiences. It doesn't mean avoiding difficult decisions, it means making them with compassion. Lincoln's life was driven by a clear sense of purpose, to preserve the Union and to eradicate the moral stain of slavery. His sense of mission gave him the strength to endure the darkest hours of the Civil War. We can all learn from his clarity of purpose. In a world filled with distractions, having a clear vision of what matters most to you can help you stay grounded and focused on your ultimate goals. A strong sense of purpose can keep you motivated even when the path is tough. Whether your purpose is to serve others, create something impactful, or contribute to your community, knowing why you're doing what you're doing provides the resilience to keep moving forward. One of Lincoln's most powerful qualities was his willingness to take action, even when fear and uncertainty clouded his path. He could have allowed the potential consequences of his decisions, such as the Emancipation Proclamation, to paralyze him. But instead, he took bold steps because he believed it was the right thing to do. If you're facing a challenge or a decision that feels overwhelming, take inspiration from Lincoln's example. Fear is natural, but it shouldn't hold you back. Lincoln didn't wait for the perfect moment to act. He acted with what he had, and he trusted that doing so would lead to the right outcome. Lincoln often took time to reflect on his decisions, his leadership, and his personal struggles. This process of self-reflection allowed him to stay aligned with his core values and to adjust his strategies when necessary. Regular self-reflection can help you gain clarity on your motivations, recognize areas for growth, and refine your approach to challenges. Dedicate time each week to reflect on your actions, your progress, and your goals. Consider what you've learned, what you could have done better, and how you can improve in the coming week. Through Abraham Lincoln's life, we can learn that the greatest battles aren't always fought on the outside. They're often fought within ourselves. The struggles we face, whether personal or professional, can either break us or build us. The key is in how we respond to them. Like Lincoln, we can cultivate resilience, practice empathy, and find purpose in our lives, no matter what obstacles stand in our way. Lincoln's life shows us that leadership and success are not simply about external accomplishments, but about the internal strength that propels us through adversity. The hidden battles, the struggles behind the scenes, those are often where true growth happens. It's in those moments of private pain and failure that we discover what we're truly made of. When we face our deepest fears and most difficult challenges, we don't always know what the outcome will be, but we can choose how we respond, and it is this choice, over and over again, that defines the course of our lives. What Lincoln demonstrated time and again is that real growth often comes from the most unexpected sources: failure, rejection, grief, and hardship. These are the tests that forge resilience. His journey from a poor, uneducated frontier boy to one of the most revered leaders in history didn't happen because of his victories alone. It was shaped by his willingness to rise from setbacks, to find meaning in suffering, and to maintain a sense of purpose no matter the personal cost. As we face our own struggles, we can take a page from Lincoln's book. We can acknowledge our pain and our losses, but not let them define us. We can embrace failure as a stepping stone and look for the lessons in each experience. Most importantly, we can lead with empathy, understanding the struggles of others, and using that knowledge to guide our decisions in a way that serves not only ourselves, but the greater good. The qualities that Lincoln exhibited throughout his life, resilience, empathy, purpose, and action, are available to all of us. It doesn't matter where we start in life or how many obstacles stand in our way. Like Lincoln, we can choose to face those challenges head-on, learn from them, and grow into stronger, more compassionate individuals. The hidden battles that shape us may be difficult, but they are also the very things that give us the fortitude to change the world, just as Lincoln did. The story of Abraham Lincoln teaches us that our struggles, no matter how heavy they feel in the moment, are not the end of the story. They can be the beginning of something greater, something transformative. By cultivating resilience, empathy, and clarity of purpose, we can turn our greatest challenges into our most powerful sources of strength and leadership. Just as Lincoln found the strength to lead a nation through its darkest hour, so too can we find the strength to navigate our own personal journeys and rise to meet our purpose. So as you reflect on Lincoln's life, ask yourself, how can I apply these principles in my own life? What hidden battles am I facing, and how can I use them as opportunities for growth? Remember, the strength to lead, to change, and to overcome resides within you. Just like Lincoln, you have the capacity to rise, transform, and make a lasting impact on the world around you.